red light, green light, stop and go. And that's really what we saw out of trade policy this week. First of all, the courts had said no, and then Trump said yes. So you can understand why when we look at all of the earnings reports, some of these analysts don't know which way to go.
Oh, sure. And that's why you really have to map out different scenarios. And that's one of the things that we always do when we look at individual equities is think about, what's like a conservative valuation, kind of a bear case scenario. What's your base case, kind of a fair value, and then what's maybe a little aggressive or kind of optimistic. And that's what we're hearing from a lot of companies about. We don't know what policy is going to look like over the next few months or even over the next year. So let's give scenarios. And that's not a bad approach. It's about being prepared. You lay out the different scenarios and just have a plan for however it might play out.
Yeah, and for sure, if you know how I work, I look through a continuum and say, all right, on one side, it's worst case, the middle is the base case, and then on the right-hand side is best case. And we do that often, not only just looking at companies, but how we make business decisions. But you go back to policies, and I remember a conversation we had, probably early in the year and said, buckle up, Buttercup, because policy is going to change. And so you look at regulatory policy and trade policy and tax policy and fiscal policy, they continue to move.
Oh, yeah.
So the fact that this locomotive of an economy we have in this country continues to go down the road just shows you how strong it is.
Yeah, and politics is getting a lot of the attention because it is changing. It's interesting, but the underlying strength of the economy, the people who wake up every day and do their jobs, they go to work, they create wealth for people, and that's really what powers the economy going forward. Policies do obviously matter, but policies aren't everything. Mm-hmm. And this past week, I did think that it was interesting about how we had tariff policy front and center, where what I'm really interested in is what is tax policy going to be looking like? Because we did see movement there over the last couple of weeks, getting the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that one big, beautiful bill through the House into the hands of the Senate. Now it's going to likely change and then, of course, have to go back to the House to reconcile those differences. But, progress is being made there. On the regulatory side, we do know, hearing from a lot of businesses about how much easier it is in order to, build a factory, how much easier it is to get approvals in terms of, with oil exploration. Even though with low oil prices, the energy companies that I've been following have said that it does seem like it's a little bit more accommodating environment. So things are moving, I think, incrementally in a positive direction, despite all the noise around tariffs and the such.
So Friday afternoon, President Trump had a press conference, and we were waiting with bated breath to see if that would move the markets. And in fact, it did do that. Mm-hmm. But it was started off as just a thank you to Elon Musk and going back to his companies. But it's, of course, turned into all of these things. Are we going to get some movement on the tax bill? That's a really big deal. And of course, on trade policy. So we learned a little bit, right? But the big thing that I took away from it was the comment that he made on Friday afternoon that China and the United States are going to work it out. Those were his words. And so he said he's going to talk to President Xi, and they'll focus on trying to move those things forward. That's the big deal, because China all along has been the big open question to this point.
Sure. Well, if we think about what was going on, say, Friday morning, there was the post from President Trump on Truth Social about being upset that China had violated the terms of the agreement, and he never specified what it was. During that press conference or that celebration of Elon Musk's service to the country that he was talking about on Friday afternoon, he kind of hinted that maybe it was related to the export of those rare earth minerals, because China, they don't exactly have a complete monopoly on that. And these are important things for like magnets and different things like that. But they do have restrictions on exports of those to the United States. And it sounds like maybe they're not making enough progress on lifting those restrictions. And that's what really has him upset. So it's not necessarily the tariffs. It's more of these non-tariff trade barriers.
And we've heard a lot about that in the past. And of course, it's in both countries' best interest to try to move that forward. But a lot more news that came out this week. The biggest, in my opinion, besides these two political arguments, was the news out of Nvidia. And man alive, even though they lost a big source of their revenue, they continue to crank.
That was incredible. They beat expectations with their revenue, even though they said that they really forwent or lost $8 billion in revenue from sales to China. So the export restrictions, not being able to sell their big chips, the most powerful ones, into China, that's cost them $8 billion, but they were still able to make basically like close to $45 billion in revenue in the quarter. Pretty incredible. But the CEO, during the press conferences afterwards, the calls with analysts and then the discussion with the press, he did mention how really by restricting U.S. exports to China, it's forcing them to develop their own technology instead of being dependent on U.S. technology. So I thought that was kind of interesting how he was kind of weighing into politics there a little bit. But obviously he's got like 8 billion reasons to weigh in.
He had 8 billion reasons. And of course, he did sell some shares this week as well, a significant amount. But by the way, Nvidia is so far ahead of everyone else. So China can say that. But you talk about this Blackwell chip, right, of course, and then the thing after that, the Rubin chip that's going to be released in 2026, they can't make it any faster.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's so small at this point, Danny, that, they just can't get any faster. So do they move from where they are today to some of this quantum computing? That's probably the next step. We're going to have to watch all of that as it plays out. We are entering a brave new world.